Hello guys and welcome. With the sad state that Fury is in Shadowlands, you literally have to be at your absolute best in order to compete with your raid in terms of DPS. In this video, I'll be going over some of the things that you can do in order to push your DPS's Fury to the next level. So we're going to go ahead and start with the talents. Now, choosing the right talents for the fight ahead is one of the most important things that you can do to improve your parse numbers for each raid boss individually. There are many factors that can go into this, such as the amount of movement in a fight, how many adds there are, or if you need to CC, things of that nature. But here I'm just going to give you a general overview of the recommended talent choices for each particular boss fight style. And you can make changes, as you go. But there are guides online that break down what you should choose individually for each boss, and I'll put that link in the description below. We're going to start out here with the single target raid boss encounters and the talents that you should spec into if you want to be a little more successful in these type of encounters. You have three choices here in your first tier. Your first choice is going to be sudden death. Sudden death is your best choice here in most cases. Sudden death causes your attacks to have a chance to reset the cooldown on execute and allow it to be used on targets above 20% health. Sudden death also adds proc-based gameplay and is the best overall single target talent, particularly when paired with the Condemn from the Venthyr Covenant. It is also useful in multi-target since execute can be cleaved with Whirlwind. Now, Fresh Meat is a highly situational talent choice that is useful on fights where there are an abundance of fresh adds to kill. Fresh Meat increases Bloodthirst's chance to trigger Enrage from 30% to 45% and causes the first Bloodthirst against each target to guarantee Enrage. So this means that the first time, and only the first time, that you use Bloodthirst against a target, you will trigger Enrage. Not useful at all in a single target fight. Now, War Machine just slightly increases rage generation for your swings and when a target is also killed. Not a good choice in any situation having to do with single target raid encounters, and it is not recommended to be selected at all. Now, your tier 2 talents have to do with control and mobility abilities. You get these at level 25. There's also three choices. And your go-to in this tier is going to be Double Time. Double Time is the choice both for the extra mobility and rage generation. It adds a second use of charge and reduces its cooldown from 20 to 17 seconds. Next up would be Stormbolt. Stormbolt is situationally useful in dungeons and PvP content. It grants an active ability with a 20-yard range, which deals trivial damage and stuns the target. Now, seeing as most boss adds and raids are immune to stuns, this talent is extremely situational. And last but not least, we have Impending Victory. This replaces Victory Rush with a new active ability, which spends 10 rage to heal 30% of your maximum health. It's on a 30-second cooldown. Getting a killing blow will reset this cooldown, and it is only used in situations which absolutely require extra in-combat healing, given that Fury already has a considerable amount of self-healing and would rather not waste the raid. Now, your tier 3 abilities are here to customize your rotation. The tier 3 talents are the meat of your talent tree. They can all increase DPS in varying situations. Now, most of the time, your default choice will be Massacre. Massacre reduces the cooldown of execute and allows it to be used on targets below 35% health instead of 20%. It is much more competitive than before, allowing execute to be used more often, making it a very strong option when paired with Condemn from the Venthyr Covenant. Now, in pure single target fights with little downtime on the boss, such as Sludge Fist, Frenzy can be very strong. Frenzy causes Rampage to increase haste by 3%, stacking 3 times, but resets when used against a new target. It is a very good single target ability, but lacks multi-target potential due to the buff resetting on new targets. This makes it somewhat awkward to use, even in primarily single target encounters which contain priority adds or target swapping. And then finally we have Onslaught, which adds a new activated ability which deals moderate damage and generates 15 rage, but can only be used while enraged. It fits a bit awkwardly into the rotation as it is not high enough priority to outweigh Rampage, Execute, or even Bloodthirst, but deals respectable damage and synergizes very well with Fresh Meat to open combat with a strong burst of damage and rage generation. However, I do not see it beating out any of the other two options in this tier currently. Next up is the Tier 4 talents. These provide you extra defense and mobility. And for most fights, War Paint will be your go-to in this tier. It passively reduces your damage taken during Enrage by 10, and is the best defensive option when increased mobility is not needed. Furious Charge causes charge to make your next Bloodthirst heal for 250%. It is situational at best due to being undermined by Victory Rush in most solo content, and taking too long to set up in group content with a healer. I would advise against ever taking this talent. Finally, we have Bounding Stride, which grants 70% movement speed for 3 seconds when you use Heroic Leap, and reduces its cooldown by 15 seconds. It is useful in general gameplay, but only practical in raid encounters which actually require you to leap more often than normal. And now we have your Tier 5 abilities, and these talents, they add passives to your rotation, and the most commonly used talent in this tier is Cruelty. It causes Raging Blow to deal 20% more damage while enraged, and increases the chance to reset its cooldown to 30%. Cruelty increases the potency of Raging Blow by a respectable amount, which synergizes even better with Reckless Abandon. It is currently the strongest talent for sustained damage, although does not get nearly as much value in multi-target, where Raging Blow is used less often. And right next to that we have Frothing Berserker, which causes Rampage to have a 20% chance to refund 20 rage. It adds chunkier but less reliable rage generation, making it better for burst damage. And then Seethe causes Bloodthirst hits to generate 2 extra rage or 4 extra rage on a crit. Now, it might not seem like a lot, but it does add a consistent amount of extra rage generation, which adds up over the course of a long encounter. Due to the low value of Critical Strike, it's currently slightly worse than Frothing Berserker at this time. Next up we have Tier 6, and these talents, they enhance your single and multi-target damage. For single target, Dragon Roar is your best option most of the time. It grants an additional active ability that deals high damage to all targets within 12 yards, dealing triple damage on crit, but reduced damage to secondary targets, and is best for single target and low target cleave due to the progressive damage fall off as target count increases. Now, Bladestorm grants an additional active ability that deals massive damage over 4 seconds to 8 targets within 8 yards, on a 1-minute cooldown. While active, you are immune to slowing and crowd controlling effects, but continue to attack, dodge, and use defensive abilities. It is the top AoE option, slightly worse than Dragon Roar against less than 3 targets, but much stronger as more are added. And last in this tier is Meat Cleaver, which causes Whirlwind to deal 30% increased damage and make the next 4 single target abilities cleave instead of 2. It is the simplest, but least bursty ability, primarily designed for sustained multi-target encounters. The extra charges of the cleaving buff simplify the rotation slightly, but you will generally run out of cooldowns and resort to using Whirlwind anyway. The Whirlwind damage increase largely exists to give the talent a single target component to compete with Dragon Roar in Bladestorm, which it unfortunately does not. And now we finally have the 7th and final tier of talents. These talents improve your burstiness. In most cases, you will want to go with Siegebreaker. Siegebreaker grants an additional active ability that deals moderate damage to a single target, and increases the damage dealt to it by 15% for 10 seconds on a 30-second cooldown. It adds frequent burst windows, ranging from equal to slightly better than Reckless Abandon. It is very potent alongside Frothing Berserker and Bladestorm, since the debuff can be cleaved with Whirlwind. Running a close second is Anger Management. Anger Management reduces the cooldown of Recklessness by 1 second for every 20 rage spent. It helps sync the cooldown of Recklessness with Bladestorm, making it very good in Mythic Plus. The only downside is that it makes your Recklessness cooldown shorter than most on-use trinket cooldowns, so a lot of people that have those macro together might need to adjust that. And finally, we have Reckless Abandon. Reckless Abandon causes Recklessness to generate 50 rage when used, and replaces Bloodthirst with Bloodbath, Raging Blow with Crushing Blow. It is the burstiest and most reactive option, useful for killing rares and long damage phases and boss encounters and things like that. The replacement abilities deal more damage and have extra effects, although their relatively low priority means you still will not be using them on cooldown. Now when it comes to multi-target and cleave fights, there isn't really much you need to change. The main thing you need to worry about is whether you're going to be using Dragon's Roar or Blade Storm. The only thing that really decides this is if there are 3 or less targets, you want to go with Dragon Roar, and anything more than 3, especially on the higher end with lots and lots of ads, you absolutely want to go with Blade Storm. It just scales so much better with the higher amount of ads that there are. Next up, we will go over Covenant choices. Now, to save time, I am going to keep this short and simple. Venthyr and Kyrian are the top 2 choices, with Venthyr outperforming Kyrian in most aspects of rating. With Condemn changing your execute to magic damage, therefore ignoring armor, and also being able to be used on targets above 80% HP, and if talented, below 35% HP, you can essentially use your Condemn for 55% of a boss's HP. You can also cleave this ability with Whirlwind, making it very potent for cleave-heavy fights. The Kyrian Covenant is a good Covenant choice as well, but if you are looking to max out your numbers, I would go with Venthyr. And now we will briefly go over your Conduit choices. Now keep in mind that it is still very early in the expansion, and as more Conduit trees unlock, this list will change. But for now, in the Venthyr tree, you will want to go with Nagia the Mistblade. Follow the path left to your first potency conduit, Ashen Juggernaut. This conduit will make Condemn or Execute increase the critical strike chance of Condemn or Execute by 1.3 to 2.5% for 8 seconds, stacking up to 8 times. Down the line, you will get to your first Finesse conduit, which should be Inspiring Presence. It is really the only useful rating Finesse conduit, and it makes Rallying Cry's duration and health granted increase by 20%. Quite a big buff. Down a couple of slots, you will get to your Endurance conduit, and here you should use Stalwart Guardian. As Fury, it simply reduces the cooldown of Enraged regeneration by 20 seconds, which is quite handy. From here, take the path to the right to the next Finesse conduit, where you will choose Safeguard. This makes Intervene reduce damage taken by the target by 8%. Just be sure that if it is a tank, he knows how to remove the buff before it gets you killed. Now at the end of this path, it will take you down to Dauntless Duelist, a very strong choice, as the first enemy you damage in combat takes 3% more damage from you throughout the entire fight. That is quite a large chunk of damage on bosses. And next up, we are going to take a look at Legendaries, and really your only choice here is to go with Deathmaker. Deathmaker is very competitive in single target, allowing higher uptime on Siegebreaker. While the effect does work in multi-target situations, it is less reliable, as each target hit has an independent chance of proccing the effect. Now, just to give you a choice, the only other viable option, and I do use that word lightly, is Judgment of the Arbiter. Judgment of the Arbiter is a rather bland but reliable single target effect, which also has the potential for AoE under the right conditions. In a perfect setup, the tank will wear the second effect, allowing the blast to easily arc through enemy targets. All in all, just go with Deathmaker. Next, we'll go over a very simplified rotation for Fury, and basically what you need to know is that everything you're doing in this spec is in order to get yourself enraged. Once you are enraged is when you want to use your hard-hitting ability, which is your Condemn if you're Venthyr or your Execute if you're not. So what you want to do is basically build rage up with your smaller abilities. You want to get yourself enraged by using Rampage. Rampage has a 100% chance to enrage you. Bloodthirst has a 30% chance to enrage you. Use either one of those two to get enraged. Once you are enraged is when you want to save your executes. and your rampage is 4. So basically what you're going to do is whenever you start a fight, you're going to charge in. Charging in gives you builds rage, gives you a base amount of rage to actually work with and start your rotation. Now the first thing you want to do is to cast Rampage if Enrage is not active or at more than 90 rage. Recklessness, use that on cooldown or whenever you need a burst. And what I mean by that is if you have to wait 20-25 seconds because there's a heroism phase or a phase where a boss takes more damage, then do that. Just hold off for those 20 seconds for Recklessness. You want to cast Siegebreaker during Recklessness or in between Recklessness's cooldowns. It's basically going to be used on cooldown. Then there comes the Execute or the Condemn. Whenever there's a sudden death proc, you want to try to save that for when you are enraged. You don't want to save it for too long because then you're wasting another chance to get another proc, but as long as you're enraged, use that Execute proc. Next on the priority list comes Bloodthirst. If Enraged is not active, it's a small chance, a 30% chance to activate Enrage, so you want to do that and hopefully you can get that proc. If not, you cast Raging Blow when you're at 2 charges, and then you just do Bloodthirst on cooldown. What this is doing is just building rage for your next rampage, which is going to enrage you for your next Execute or Condemn. You want to cast Bladestorm or Dragon Roar, whichever one you're using, during enrage, and you get the point here. Pretty much you have a 6-second window of being enraged, and you want to use that, for your harder hitting abilities. And if you need fillers, if you find yourself not being able to cast anything, you just hit the Raging Blow, or you can just throw in a Whirlwind. Whirlwind is your absolute bottom ability as far as single target goes. If you find yourself doing that a lot, you're probably not going to parse well at all. That's just used when there is nothing else available to use. Now there is also a phase called the Execute phase, and if you're Venthyr, this is what makes Venthyr so good. This phase is at 100 to 80% health, and if you Talented Massacre, it's from 35 to 0. Otherwise, it's just Execute at 20% to 0. But either way, when you are in the Execute phase, pretty much the only thing you're going to be doing is casting Execute, maybe one Bloodthirst or Raging Blow to get your rage up to cast a Rampage. It's pretty much Rampage, Execute, build rage to Rampage, Execute as many times as you can. Execute is actually going to build rage and get you to your next Rampage, which is going to eat up all that rage, but it's going to enrage you so you can build up and use another Execute, and just continue doing that as long as that phase is active. And that brings us into our multiple target rotation fights. Cleave fights are fights with adds. So as always, whenever possible, you want to charge in to build rage. Then you want to go ahead and cast your Bloodthirst and your Whirlwind. What your Whirlwind does is it cleaves your next 2 attacks onto your surrounding targets. After you do that, you want to hit Recklessness, and then your order of priority when you have those 2 Whirlwind stacks up is always going to be Condemn, Spear of Bastion if you're Kyrian, and then Rampage. Once you do that, those 2 stacks are worn off. You want to cast your Bladestorm or your Dragon Roar. Then you want to Whirlwind again, because you need those 2 stacks to cleave your next 2 attacks, which should be Bloodthirst and Rampage, or Execute if you have the proc. And then it's just it's a rinse and repeat of a Whirlwind, Bloodthirst, Rampage, Whirlwind, Bloodthirst, Rampage, or you can throw in your Executes or your Condemns as they proc. In your Execute phase for multiple targets, you want to do a Whirlwind, Rampage, Execute, Whirlwind, Rampage, Execute, and so on and so forth until the boss is dead. Now here I'm just going to put some macros up on the screen, and you can either pause it and write them down if you like. I got these macros from icyveins.com. There are tons more you can get from many more websites, but I'll put those up across the screen, and feel free to copy and paste these down into your game. And alright guys, I think that just about wraps it up. I covered pretty much everything that can get you started on becoming a better Fury Warrior in this rough time. Here I'll just put some resources that you can go to and do a little more researching on your own. There's tons and tons more information out there besides what I put in this video. So if you want to go ahead to these websites, feel free. There's a lot of very good world first raiders that write posts on these websites, and the things they put in there are very good to read. So with that said, if you enjoyed the video, just like always, give it a like. I don't get too many views, but I think liking them helps. If you could subscribe, that'd be great. I only got a couple hundred subscribers, but we'll make it grow in time. And I thank you for watching, and good luck with those parses. See you next time.